The scream didn't sound human. It sliced through the ocean wind like a blade made of ice and panic, tearing the world out of my hands before I even understood what was happening. One moment my daughter was laughing on the starboard side of my boat, hair whipping in the sunlight, the water throwing diamonds under her feet like it adored her. The next moment she vanished. Not stumbled, not slipped. Vanished. A splash detonated against the hull, loud enough to tear through the music, the chatter, the clinking glasses, every heartbeat on board. People froze. Conversations died mid-word. Every instinct in my body snapped awake, as if someone flipped a switch inside my skull. And then I heard her. "She pushed her!" someone shouted, voice trembling, shock twisting their words. "Karen pushed her!" Before my mind even caught up, my body was already sprinting across the deck, so hard the boards shook under my steps, the world tunneling into one single horrifying truth. My daughter was in the water, and she hadn't jumped. And as I reached the railing, I saw her small hands breaking the surface, reaching, clawing, desperate, eyes wide with the kind of terror no child should ever feel. That image burned itself into me so violently it will never leave. Karen stood behind me on the deck with a smirk carved across her face, the kind of twisted, entitled grin only an HOA tyrant could conjure, like she'd finally crowned herself queen of every petty rule she worshipped. But that's not even the half of it. Before we move forward, drop a comment. Where are you watching from right now? Because this nightmare didn't begin on the ocean. This began in Pinewood Estates, a neighborhood so obsessively polished it felt less like a community and more like a museum curated by people who had nothing better to do than enforce symmetry. Lawns trimmed to military precision, hedges squared off like geometry assignments, flowers arranged like they were auditioning for a parade. And every day, like clockwork, the same set of HOA disciples patrolled the sidewalks, clipboard parasites with superiority complexes bigger than their own mortgages. But none of them came close to Karen. Karen, the HOA president, the self-crowned monarch of Pinewood Estates. Platinum blonde bob, sunglasses glued to her skull, even indoors. Clipboard in hand like she was born with it, voice sharp enough to chip cement. She terrorized residents over lawn height, mailbox shades, fence alignment, and anything else she could twist into an intimidation attempt. She once fined a neighbor because a squirrel looked at her with aggressive posture. That was her level of delusion. My family lived comfortably but not extravagantly. I owned a small company. My wife ran a local restaurant chain. Our daughter was the bright spot of the entire block. Kids loved her, adults adored her. And weirdly, we'd never had a direct run-in with Karen. Maybe because I sat on the HOA board, though I never supported her power-drunk enforcement style or her obsession with micromanaging people's lives. Still, she ignored every vote that didn't go her way. She believed she was the law. Harmony, she called it. Control was the real word. Everything was relatively quiet, until I made one joyful, innocent mistake. I bought a yacht. Not a billionaire mega yacht, but a beautiful, well-built boat, big enough for family cruises, weekend parties, and quiet escapes. My daughter loved it. My wife adored it. I cherished it. Karen despised it. The moment she caught wind of it, she latched onto the subject with the intensity of a surveillance creep, monitoring forbidden activity. Every conversation with her afterward included some variation of the words, "your boat." And then one morning, she showed up at my door at exactly 7 a.m., smiling so unnaturally wide it looked like her face might crack. I opened the door, confused. She chirped, "Great news. My friends and I decided we're using your yacht on Saturday for our girls' celebration. We already planned everything. Just give us the keys or notify the captain. Either works." I stared at her like she'd confessed to inventing oxygen. No, I said. Calm, clear, direct. She blinked. The word hit her system like poison. Her smile dissolved, revealing the venom beneath. You'll regret being selfish, she hissed before stomping away, heels clacking like angry castanets. I thought that was the end. I was wrong. The next day, security called. Someone had tried to break into my yacht. A woman with a rented crew attempted to board it. I drove there so fast I nearly tore the tires off my car. And there she was, Karen, acting like I was the one interrupting her day. Thank God you're here, she exclaimed dramatically. These men assaulted me and blocked my reservation. You and I clearly had an agreement. No, I said again. Absolutely not. I told security she had zero permission, warned her never to try that again, and walked away before I said something I'd regret. But denying her access ignited something inside her. Something unstable. Something obsessed. 2 weeks later came my daughter's birthday cruise. The yacht was decorated with banners, music playing, kids laughing, adults unwinding. Everything was perfect. Until Karen arrived. Late. Wearing a sparkly pink dress like she was attending a royal coronation nobody invited her to. She scanned the deck with predatory focus, eyes sharp, movements unnatural. I should have sensed it. I should have sent her away. But she blended into the crowd like a malfunctioning Disney villain waiting for her cue. And then she found her moment. She lured my daughter toward the railing with some fake, syrupy concern, asking for help choosing a cupcake. And the second she reached the edge, while everyone else was distracted, she shoved my little girl with both hands. Here's where everything blew apart. The scream, the splash, the panic, the world tearing open, and me diving toward the railing like my life depended on it. My daughter was sinking, panicking, fighting. I grabbed the nearest lifebuoy, dove headfirst into the ocean, and tore through that freezing water like it owed me blood. When I reached her, she clung to me with every ounce of strength she had. The crew hauled us back on board while chaos erupted on deck. People crying, people shouting, people pointing at Karen. Karen tried to escape, like she believed she could just walk off the boat and melt into the horizon. She didn't account for one thing. She was on a yacht, surrounded by witnesses, surrounded by people who saw everything. By the time we reached the dock, police were waiting. They handcuffed her while she screamed about conspiracies, smear campaigns, HOA authority. Nonsense only a collapsing tyrant would spit out. She shrieked that we were trying to ruin her life because she was the HOA president. As if that title was some kind of diplomatic immunity instead of a clipboard and a superiority complex. My daughter went to the hospital. Minor injuries, shaken, terrified, but alive. And that's when the real payback began, and not one of them could look her in the eye. Everything changed the moment I stepped out of that hospital room and felt the weight of what happened start to harden into something sharper than shock. Control. My daughter lay resting inside, blankets tucked around her, her tiny fingers still trembling from the memory of the ocean swallowing her whole. My wife sat beside her, eyes raw from tears, but filled with a fury that matched my own. And as I stood there in the hallway, watching nurses pass by, listening to distant monitors beep, something inside me settled into place with the force of a metal door slamming shut. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a violation engineered by a power-drunk HOA overlord who thought she owned not just the neighborhood, but every life inside it. And I knew I couldn't let her walk away with a smirk attached to her name. Pinewood Estates wasn't always a battlefield. When we first moved in, the place looked like paradise dipped in money and discipline. Perfect lawns, perfect homes, perfect streets, perfect surveillance. You could practically smell the HOA rules in the air, floating between manicured hedges like pollen engineered in a lab. The community brochure advertised prestige, order, and exclusive tranquility. What it didn't mention was the real truth. Pinewood was a kingdom, and Karen ran it like a dictatorship polished with pastel colors. I didn't join the HOA board for prestige. I joined because I wanted a say in how the neighborhood operated. I wanted to help maintain the peace. I wanted to be part of the decisions that shaped our lives. What I didn't expect was to be reduced to a background character in Karen's cult of control, where every meeting was just a stage for her to parade her fake authority. She never listened to anyone unless they echoed her demands. She dismissed votes she didn't like. She rewrote rules to suit her moods. And the board, spineless, terrified, conditioned, followed her as if she held their mortgages in her purse. Whenever I spoke up, she smothered my input under a smile shaped like a blade. She said things like, "That's not the direction the community wants," or "Let's maintain harmony," or "We should trust leadership judgment," all while twisting her clipboard like it was a scepter of judgment. But beneath those thin layers of sweetness sat something darker. A surveillance creep with a superiority complex so inflated it cast shadows over entire properties. Neighbors trembled when they saw her approaching. People hid behind blinds. Parents pulled children inside at the sound of her heels clicking. She was the kind of petty tyrant who believed every lawn belonged to her vision, every fence to her symmetry, every mailbox to her approval. And for a while, she got away with it. Because nobody wanted to fight. Nobody felt strong enough. Nobody had proof. Until now. My involvement with the HOA board meant I had access to documents she didn't expect me to understand. But she underestimated two things about me. First, I've built my entire career on reading contracts, analyzing systems, and detecting flaws in operations. Second, I know how to stay calm even when the world is burning under my feet. So after the hospital, I went home, brewed a pot of coffee so strong it tasted like revenge, and opened my laptop with the intention of dismantling her entire kingdom piece by piece. The first thing I reviewed was Karen's reaction at the dock. She hadn't panicked. She hadn't apologized. She hadn't even tried to pretend it wasn't her fault. She shifted blame instantly, onto the wind, onto the boat, onto everything except her own hands. That wasn't shock. That wasn't fear. That was entitlement so deep it had eroded whatever humanity she once had. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't spontaneous. This was obsession. Her obsession with my boat. Her obsession with control. Her obsession with punishing what she saw as non-compliance. And it all started before the yacht ever came into our lives. Karen had always hated that she couldn't control me. I voted against her rule changes. I challenged her citations. I asked questions she didn't want answered. And worst of all, I refused to fear her. She noticed. She remembered. She planned. And the yacht triggered her the way a spark triggers gasoline. Pinewood Estates had residents who trembled in their driveways because of her, but we also had quiet pockets of rebellion. People who whispered about her harassment, her coercion, her fake enforcement tactics. When I reached out to them after the incident, their relief was immediate. They'd been waiting for someone to stand up to her. They'd been waiting for someone to push back against her HOA mafia routine. They'd been waiting for Karen to finally target the wrong person. And she had. The more I learned, the clearer her pathology became. Karen believed the neighborhood was her personal kingdom. She imposed regulations that made no logical sense, telling people where to place potted plants, dictating the number of inches between driveway stones, enforcing energy harmony by demanding homeowners repaint their doors if she felt the color disrupted the community aura. I watched her once measure a garden gnome with a ruler while lecturing the owner about ornament guidelines. She wasn't managing a neighborhood. She was staging a cult. And Pinewood Estates was her temple. But something else happened as I gathered information from neighbors. People started telling me things they had never admitted out loud. Stories of intimidation, stories of threats, stories of Karen appearing on porches unannounced, photographing kids in yards, pounding on doors before sunrise, issuing citations with timestamps from moments she wasn't even present. It was a trespassing violation masquerading as leadership. And every story stacked another brick onto the wall of rage rising inside me. But rage wasn't enough. Rage blinds. I needed clarity, I needed precision, I needed control, and I took it. My daughter's attack gave me something Karen never expected, purpose sharpened into a weapon. And as I dug deeper into HOA documents, financial reports, archived emails, and old meeting minutes, the truth began to reveal itself. Karen had been building her power for years through strategic fines, fear tactics, and selective rule enforcement designed to weaken resistance. This wasn't incompetence. This was a system, and it was collapsing. But that's not even the half of it. The deeper I dug, the more I found threads connected to my own family. Subtle comments Karen made at meetings, notations in her clipboard scribbled next to my address, suggestions that my household needed additional oversight to ensure proper integration into community ethos. She wasn't just angry about the yacht. She had marked us months ago, and that made everything she did to my daughter unforgivable. As the night stretched on, my dining table transformed into a battlefield. Documents spread like fallen soldiers, notes scribbled in margins, arrows connecting violations to dates and dates to witnesses and witnesses to patterns. I wasn't piecing together an incident. I was assembling a case, a structure, a map of Karen's entire abuse of power ecosystem. And I realized something else. If I didn't destroy her completely, she would crawl back. She would retaliate. She would rebuild her clipped wing empire. And she would come for my family again. Not one of them could look me in the eye after what she did. But they would soon. Karen didn't build her reign overnight. Pinewood Estates didn't fall under her control because she was charismatic or respected. She took power the way all petty tyrants do. Slowly, strategically, through intimidation attempts disguised as community service. And if I was going to dismantle her completely, I needed to understand the structure she had engineered brick by brick. Everything about Pinewood's HOA looked normal from the outside. A board of 7, annual elections, monthly meetings, maintenance budgets, landscaping schedules, nothing unusual. But the deeper I dug into the documents I had access to, the clearer the truth became. The HOA wasn't a governing body. It was a funnel of control Karen crafted to bend the neighborhood into a shape she preferred. And she planted herself at the center, like a queen ant surrounded by worker drones who didn't even realize they were feeding her power. Karen ran Pinewood like an HOA cult. The bylaws were her scripture. The landscaping company she hired functioned like a loyal militia. The board members she handpicked became her disciples, trained through years of pressure, manipulation, and carefully curated fear. The structure looked democratic, but it was nothing more than a puppet show, where every string, every vote, every decision started and ended with her clipboard. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was realizing how many people had been dragged into her system without even noticing. Some were coerced, some were exhausted, some were financially cornered, some simply wanted to avoid conflict. And Karen fed off that compliance like a parasite. She learned exactly how much pressure each resident could tolerate before breaking. She kept files. She tracked patterns. She weaponized their fears. My laptop screen glowed with spreadsheets of fines she had issued over the years, amounts so absurdly high it bordered on extortion. $1,000 for grass half an inch too tall. $800 for a disruptive door color. $500 for inappropriate yard energy. And once, she fined a resident for improper winter vibe presentation. That wasn't HOA governance. That was psychological warfare wearing a name badge. But here's where everything blew apart. Karen didn't just target homeowners she disliked. She built a hierarchy, a ranking system, a map of who feared her the most, who would obey without question, who would fold under pressure, who would comply to avoid humiliation, and who represented a threat to her reign. And my family? We ranked highest on her threat board. At first, I thought the notes in her files beside our name were accidental. After all, as a board member, my address might have required more documentation. But the comments weren't administrative. They were personal. Potential disruption. Watch behavior. Unpredictable compliance. Requires monitoring. And then, a handwritten note that sat like acid on the page. Child extremely active. Risk for community accidents. She wrote that before the yacht. Before she shoved my daughter into the ocean. Before any conflict officially started. This wasn't punishment. This was a premeditated vendetta. One she polished with HOA language and weaponized through layers of bureaucracy. Her abuse of authority didn't stop at fines. She implemented fake enforcement teams, volunteer compliance monitors she selected from her circle of loyalists. They prowled the neighborhood at night. They photographed windows. They measured driveways. They left sticky notes on doors threatening future action, and residents accepted it because refusing meant becoming the next target. One neighbor recounted a night when Karen banged on their door at 5 a.m., demanding to inspect their patio furniture because the energy alignment seemed off. Another claimed she found Karen in her backyard photographing the children's playhouse for illegal structure potential. That wasn't oversight. That was home invasion behavior clothed in pastel professionalism. And the HOA board meetings, they were no better. Karen ran them like a courtroom where she was the judge, jury, executioner, and self-appointed expert on every subject. She interrupted anyone who challenged her. She rushed votes when she sensed dissent. She manipulated meeting minutes to erase objections. She congratulated herself for keeping Pinewood pure. And most of the board complied. Because she had leverage on each of them. One board member had financial trouble. Karen offered to assist by adjusting their dues. Another had a child who violated noise policies. Karen forgot to issue fines in exchange for loyalty. Another relied on Karen to keep rumors about his late-night visitors quiet. Karen didn't build allies. She collected hostages. But none of that mattered anymore. Because the moment she pushed my daughter off that boat, she didn't just break the line. She erased it. She didn't know it yet. But everything she spent years building, every brick of power, every manipulated rule, every coerced vote, every fear she instilled, was now working against her. And I was about to use it all. But before I moved into attack mode, I needed to understand the financial structure she used to keep her power fortified. I dug into the HOA accounts. Pinewood charged some of the highest dues in the county, thousands per year, supposedly for landscaping, maintenance, and community repair. But the money didn't add up. Expenses repeated at odd intervals. Payments went to the same contractor, Karen's cousin, despite his poor reputation. Materials were billed 3 times higher than market price. Routine maintenance costs fluctuated wildly. And suspiciously, every invoice bore Karen's signature of approval. The community wasn't beautified. It was exploited. She used the HOA as a personal ATM. And the residents unknowingly funded her lifestyle, her vacations, her wardrobe, her designer sunglasses, her relentless hunger for control. And if someone questioned her, they got a violation notice the next week. Not for something real, for something she invented. A trespassing violation, a noise complaint, a poor aesthetic choice. anything to shut them up. She ruled Pinewood through financial intimidation and social humiliation, but now I had her blueprint, and I could see the cracks in the walls she built. And then came the moment that shifted everything from investigation to retaliation. A man named Victor, one of Karen's loyal board members, refused to give me access to a set of archived emails. Victor was always quiet during meetings, always nodded when Karen spoke, always avoided eye contact whenever conflict arose. But when I requested the financial audit logs, he panicked. He sputtered excuses. He delayed responses. He claimed the system was malfunctioning. Until finally, after enough pressure, he accidentally sent me a corrupted file containing fragments of deleted messages. The fragments were enough. Enough to reveal Karen wasn't just abusing power. She was orchestrating a coordinated harassment campaign against multiple homeowners. Enough to show she had instructed board members to isolate certain residents. Enough to prove she ordered compliance teams to visit homes late at night. Enough to expose a plan she wrote years ago titled Community Alignment Strategy, which, written plainly, meant eliminating anyone who challenged her control. And at the bottom of that document, underlined twice in red ink, was my name. She labeled me primary disruptor. And my daughter, my innocent, joyful daughter, was listed as a distraction liability. Karen had been waiting for an excuse to strike. She created one, but she failed to factor in the one variable she couldn't control. Me. She built her empire on compliance, fear, submission, and board members too frightened to challenge her. She had no idea how to handle someone who didn't flinch, someone who didn't negotiate with bullies disguised as homeowners' leaders, someone who wouldn't fold under gossip, fines, or threats, someone who watched her shove his child into the ocean and vowed to end her reign with the same calm precision she pretended to possess. Pinewood Estates didn't know what was coming next, but they were about to. The moment I realized Karen had marked my family long before she ever laid a hand on my daughter, something inside me stopped burning hot and started burning cold. Cold is steadier. Cold is controlled. Cold is lethal, and that was exactly what I needed for what came next. This wouldn't be rage anymore. This would be evidence, proof, precision. I wasn't going to just expose her. I was going to dismantle her entire HOA cult with the same methodical brutality she used to terrorize the neighborhood. The first step was gathering every shred of documentation she'd manipulated over the years. I started with the digital archive, meeting minutes, violation reports, financial statements. They looked polished at first glance. Too polished, perfect formatting, matching language, identical sentence structures across different years. That was the first red flag. Real documents carry inconsistencies. These looked templated, rehearsed, doctored. I clicked deeper. Accidentally repeated signatures, timestamps on emails that didn't align with meeting dates, citations issued when Karen was out of town, violations filed within the same minute for houses on opposite ends of the neighborhood. It was like unraveling a sweater Karen had knitted herself. One pulled string at a time, the entire fabric twisted apart and revealed the lie beneath. But that's not even the half of it. I brought up the HOA database logs. Every document stored had a digital trail. Most residents didn't know that. Karen counted on them not knowing. But I knew how to read metadata, track changes, extract revisions. And what I found made Pinewood's perfectly manicured lawns feel like crime scenes. Dozens, no hundreds of documents were edited not in meetings, not after board votes, but in the middle of the night from Karen's personal device. Ordinance amendments, passed by majority, showed no voting history. Violations verified by board inspection had no time-stamped images. Entire pages of bylaws had been swapped with newer versions that weren't registered with the county as required by law. And hidden deep inside the folder labeled Community Expectations was a draft she tried to delete. A draft titled Asset Access Expansion Proposal. The document wasn't finished, but the intent was clear. She wanted authority to classify resident-owned assets as community-integrated resources, subject to HOA discretion. Boats, vehicles, tools, pools, yards, anything she wanted. That obsession with my yacht suddenly made sense. She wasn't jealous. She believed it should have been hers. My fingers tightened on the mouse as I sat alone in my dim living room, the glow from the screen painting the walls in harsh blue light. Everything about her behavior aligned with one thing. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was manufacturing control. The discovery fueled me, but what happened next sharpened me. I needed witnesses, not gossip, not speculation, real testimony, the kind that stands up in court and dismantles tyrants. So I began knocking on doors. The neighbors who once avoided eye contact now opened up the moment they saw the seriousness in my face. They knew what had happened to my daughter. They knew Karen had gone too far. And slowly, the stories spilled out like water finally breaking through a dam. Mrs. Ellison was first. A retired teacher, gentle, soft-spoken, kind. She looked over her shoulder twice before letting me inside. Once the door closed, she exhaled shakily, like she'd been holding her breath for 2 years. She told me how Karen once forced her to replace her entire garden because the flowers did not complement the neighborhood's emotional landscape. Karen photographed her backyard without permission. Karen issued a violation while she was in the hospital. Karen threatened to fine her for having guests over because their car disrupted driveway symmetry. As she spoke, her hands trembled, her voice warped by humiliation she had swallowed year after year. And when I told her what Karen did to my daughter, she clasped her hands to her mouth and cried harder than I'd ever seen anyone cry over someone else's child. What? But the next neighbor's story cut even deeper. A single father named Marcos described nights when Karen's so-called compliance watchers knocked on his door past midnight demanding access to inspect potential moisture violations. At midnight. He refused, and Karen retaliated with weekly fines, escalating threats, and reports accusing him of unstable domestic behavior. He showed me screenshots of emails Karen sent, implying he could lose community privileges if he didn't cooperate. Community privileges didn't exist in the bylaws. She invented them. And when he pushed back, she reported his house to the county for unsafe occupancy, triggering an investigation that traumatized his 6-year-old son. Hearing that made my chest tighten with a new kind of fury, not wildfire fury, but molten precision meant to be poured into a mold and hardened into action. The deeper I went into the neighborhood, the more rot I found. A widow named Nora who nearly lost her home because Karen fined her over a seasonal wreath. A young couple fined thousands because Karen insisted their fence leaned 3 degrees too far to the left. A teenager accused of aggressive footstep disturbances. Even for an HOA villain, that was unhinged, and every person repeated the same phrase. I didn't fight back because I didn't think anyone would believe me, or I didn't want to make things worse, or I didn't know how to stop her. They weren't just afraid of Karen. They were conditioned to accept her power, conditioned by her years of psychological chokeholds, conditioned by her clipboard and her goons and her theater of fake authority. But I wasn't conditioned, and I wasn't afraid. As the testimonies collected, a pattern emerged. Karen always targeted the vulnerable first: the elderly, single parents, new homeowners, quiet families, people who couldn't afford lawyers, people who couldn't afford fines, people who didn't know their rights. And once she wore them down, She expanded outward, escalating, intimidating, tightening her grip on the entire neighborhood. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was eliminating independence. She was building dependency. She was constructing an HOA monarchy where she chose who thrived and who suffered. And the discovery that tied everything together came from an unexpected place. Hugh, an older resident known for working on his porch every morning. He waved me over the day after I began collecting statements. He shook his head when I asked if he'd heard what happened. "Heard?" he said. "This neighborhood's been waiting for that woman to go too far." He invited me inside, shuffled to a back room, and returned carrying a cardboard box heavy enough to thump when he set it down. Inside were records, not HOA records, survivor records, copies of fines, photos of violations, letters she mailed, emails she wrote, notes neighbors slipped under his door asking for help. He'd been collecting them for years, hoping one day someone would be brave or reckless enough to confront her. Every document in that box was a nail in her coffin. Every piece of paper was a blueprint of her corruption. Every letter was a confession she never intended to write, but did through incompetence and entitlement. I photographed everything, scanned everything, indexed everything. I organized the evidence into folders: harassment, fraud, fabrication, trespass, abuse of authority, unauthorized surveillance, financial misconduct. And then came the file that nearly made me punch a hole through the wall: an email exchange between Karen and a subcontractor she hired to perform discreet compliance checks. That was her phrasing. Discreet compliance checks. The messages showed she paid him under the table to walk through people's yards, look into their windows, and collect photos she could later use to fabricate citations. That wasn't enforcement. That was stalking. That was home invasion behavior. That was criminal. But the ugliest discovery came last. A folder buried deep inside Karen's shared drive labeled Long-Term Strategy. At first it looked like a planning document, projections, ideas, potential rule proposals. Then I read it. It wasn't strategy. It was surveillance. A resident-by-resident dossier. Who was compliant? Who resisted? Who feared her? Who didn't? And then my stomach dropped. There was a section titled Disruptive Households. My address was at the top. Under it were notes describing my daughter. Her routines, her habits, her energy level, her preferred play spots, her tendency to wander near the boat when we were prepping for trips. Karen didn't shove my daughter out of frustration. She shoved my daughter because she viewed her as a community management factor. She attacked a child because she believed controlling the child would control me. That was when the cold inside me turned into steel. There was no longer a question of whether I'd bring her down. The only question was how devastatingly I'd do it. But here's where everything blew apart again. The more evidence I collected, the more panicked Karen's inner circle became. Victor began sending me emails demanding I return confidential documents. 2 board members cornered me on my evening walk, pretending to check in, but their eyes kept darting to the phone in my pocket. One night I caught someone parked across from my house, engine running, lights off. They drove away the moment I stepped outside. Karen's empire wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing, and collapsing systems become desperate. But desperation makes stupidity predictable, and predictable enemies are already defeated. I didn't hide the evidence. I didn't store it quietly. I compiled it, organized it, prepared it for the one arena Karen never expected to face truth inside, the HOA meeting room she once ruled like a throne. And when I finished assembling the final file, nearly 5 inches thick, packed with proof so powerful it could dent metal, I closed it gently and whispered the words that sealed her fate. The power trip ends now. The night before the HOA meeting felt like the calm before a storm that had been gathering for years. Not just mine, everyone's. The neighborhood lights glowed faintly through my windows as I sat at the dining table, reviewing the evidence one last time. Pages spread everywhere, emails highlighted, financial statements stapled, photos clipped to documents like exposed nerves of Karen's entire operation. My house felt like a command center, not a home. And for the first time since the attack on my daughter, I wasn't fueled by anger. I was fueled by inevitability. Karen spent years crafting a throne made of fear. I was about to burn it to ash, and not one person in Pinewood Estates understood just how violently her empire was about to collapse. But they would. When the morning came, I dressed in silence. My wife looked at me with something between pride and worry in her eyes. "End it," she said softly. And I nodded because I had no intention of doing anything less. The HOA building, a pristine structure Karen insisted be repainted every year, was already buzzing when I arrived. Residents clustered outside in nervous groups. Some whispered. Some stared at the entrance like something monstrous lived inside. And in a way, something did. As I walked toward the meeting room, heads turned. People parted. Silence rippled across the hallway, the kind of silence that comes right before a verdict. When I opened the door, every board member was already seated, and there she was, Karen, perfectly composed, perfectly polished, perfectly delusional. Her platinum hair was sculpted into an immovable helmet. Her sunglasses, yes, inside, rested on her face like a shield, and her clipboard lay in front of her like a sacred artifact. She looked at me with a smirk so smug it belonged in a museum of arrogance. "We have a lot to cover today," she said, tapping her pen. Her voice dripped false authority. She thought she still owned this room. She didn't, but watching her believe she did made what was coming even sweeter. She began the meeting the same way she always did, with manufactured emergencies, inflated violations, theatrical concern about community safety. She even attempted to bring up a false claim about reckless maritime behavior that she insisted required immediate fines and possible water access suspension. That was it. That was her plan. Months of plotting, years of manipulation, and this was her big move. Punish my family again to reassert dominance. She still believed she could intimidate her way out of everything. She still believed her throne stood. She still believed I was the same compliant board member she'd pushed around before. But today, control belonged to me. I stood, slowly, calmly. My chair scraping the polished floor made the entire room flinch. Karen's smirk faltered the moment she saw the 5-inch binder I placed on the table in front of me. "I have evidence," I said, voice steady as steel. "And I will be presenting it now." The room went silent. No breaths, no shifts, no whispers. Karen's lips twitched, her hands tightening on her clipboard. "Evidence of what?" She laughed, the tremor in her voice betraying her. "Your accusations?" She emphasized the word like it was a joke, like the assault on my daughter was a misunderstanding, like her crimes were minor inconveniences. I opened the binder. The sound echoed like a crack of thunder. I handed the first stack of documents to the board members. Financial audits, forged signatures, duplicate invoices, payments to shell companies, misappropriation of funds, every single piece of her corruption laid bare. "These records," I said, "show thousands of dollars diverted into accounts connected to you, your relatives, and your associates." One board member gasped, another covered his mouth. Karen lunged forward, grabbing blindly for the papers, These are altered, she shrieked. Fabricated lies! But nobody believed her. Not anymore. I turned the page. Next, I said, are the emails. Dozens of them. Messages where she plotted harassment campaigns. Messages where she referred to residents as compliance targets. Messages where she manipulated violation reports to punish whoever challenged her. The board members skimmed them with wide eyes, each line a blade sinking deeper into Karen's collapsing control. You took those out of context, she snapped. But the timestamps, metadata, and server logs told the truth she couldn't outrun. Her voice cracked, her facade cracked, her kingdom cracked. But here's where everything blew apart. I played the video. The marina footage showing her attempted break-in, her arguing with staff, her claiming jurisdiction over resident assets, her threatening to fine the crew for denying her access to my yacht, and then the recording from the yacht on the day of my daughter's attack. Karen glaring, plotting, moving toward the railing moments before shoving a child into the water. Gasps filled the room. Someone cursed under their breath. Someone else started crying. And Karen? She broke. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair over, screaming at everyone in sight. This is a conspiracy. You're all against me. You don't appreciate what I've done for this community. Her voice warped into something hysterical, something feral, something stripped of the polished superiority she used to hide behind. She pointed at the screen, at me, at the board members, at the neighbors crowded in the back. He's lying, she shrieked. He's trying to destroy me because he hates authority. Authority. She dared speak of authority. She who twisted rules into weapons, she who trespassed under darkness, she who stalked children, she who shoved my daughter off a boat, she who built an HOA cult around fear. But her collapse wasn't complete yet. Not until the testimonies came. One by one, residents stood. Mrs. Ellison describing the backyard intrusion. Marcos describing the midnight knocks. The young couple recounting years of trumped-up fines. Nora describing threats made during her grief. Each voice trembled with trauma. Each story added weight. Each testimony crushed Karen further beneath the truth she could no longer hide. Karen stumbled backward, hair disheveled, sunglasses slipping off her face, exposing wide, terrified eyes that had never expected to see judgment. Not like this. Not from the community she believed she owned. Stop, she whispered. Stop talking. But they didn't. They couldn't. Years of fear poured out of them in waves she couldn't swim against. Then Hugh stepped forward. He placed the cardboard box, the archives of her abuse, onto the board table like a coffin. This, he said, voice shaking, is everything she has done for years. We kept it because we knew one day she would hurt the wrong person. His eyes found mine. And she finally did. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in anger, in unity, in liberation. The board called for an immediate vote of no confidence. Hands shot up instantly. Every board member but her raised their hand. Karen screamed, lunging forward to snatch the clipboard she believed tied her to power. But this time, when she reached for it, a hand grabbed her wrist. Officer Daniels, who had been silently standing by the wall. "Ma'am," he said, pulling her back, "you need to calm down." She didn't calm down. She thrashed. She kicked. She cried. She claimed persecution, She claimed conspiracy. She claimed victimhood. She claimed anything she could choke out between breaths, but truth suffocated every lie she threw into the air. And then Officer Daniels placed her in handcuffs. Slow, deliberate, final. The click of the cuffs echoed louder than her screams. Karen froze, not out of acceptance but out of terror. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, looking for a single ally, a single defender, a single person still under her spell. But the room was filled with people who had finally woken up. Not one of them could look her in the eye. She had ruled this neighborhood with intimidation for years. She had controlled lives with fines, threats, and violations. She had drenched Pinewood Estates in fear. Now she stood alone. Officer Daniels guided her toward the exit as she muttered incoherent protests. The board announced her immediate removal. Residents cheered, not loudly, but with a kind of exhausted relief, the kind that sounds like a neighborhood finally breathing for the first time in years. As Karen was dragged toward the door, she locked eyes with me. Hatred, panic, fear, and the dawning realization that her reign, her power, her facade, her entire identity were over, because she touched the wrong child. When the door shut behind her, the room exhaled. Her clipboard lay abandoned on the table, helpless without the hand that had once wielded it like a weapon. Symbolic. Pathetic. Dead. And just as I turned to leave, my phone buzzed. One message. No name. No number. You don't know what you've started. The war wasn't over yet. But Karen's power trip? The power trip ended instantly. The message sat on my screen like a venomous whisper, a final hiss from whatever shadows Karen had relied on for years to keep her schemes alive. But fear wasn't something that controlled me anymore. Not after watching my daughter claw her way out of the ocean because of a woman who believed her HOA crown made her untouchable. The cryptic warning didn't intimidate me. It focused me. If Karen had allies, if she had built something deeper than a dictatorship of fines and threats, then I was going to tear out the entire root system she'd poisoned this neighborhood with. And I wasn't going to do it alone. By now I had a team. People who had bled under her rule. People who had waited for someone to strike the first blow. People who finally understood that the HOA cult she built wasn't strong. It was fragile. Held together only by silence and fear. And since none of us were afraid anymore, her whole machine was about to collapse under its own rotting weight. Andrea, my lawyer, was the first to arrive at my house that night. She dropped a stack of binders onto my kitchen table, so heavy the wood shook. "Your HOA wasn't just mismanaged," she said. "It was run like a racket." She spread out documents like puzzle pieces snapping into place. Fraudulent liens, inflated contracts, duplicate invoices, unauthorized transfers, fake legal consultations. And worst of all, evidence that Karen had been funneling money into an account linked to a private compliance consulting service, which was nothing more than a shell corporation she controlled under a different name. It was a treasury built on fear. A fortune carved out of people she deemed weak. And she had been running it under the full belief that nobody would ever dare challenge her throne. But here's where everything blew apart. Andrea slid one final page across the table. "This," she said quietly, "is the death blow." It was a letter, hand-signed, time-stamped, and filed months ago. A letter where Karen authorized a special assessment for non-existent repairs. Money that never went to any contractor. Not one nail. Not one bag of cement. The funds had gone straight into the shell corporation, and she had personally signed the transfer. No forged signatures. No fabricated witnesses. Just Karen, bold and arrogant, leaving fingerprints all over the theft she'd assumed nobody would ever question. It was the kind of evidence that made prosecutors salivate. It was the kind of evidence that turned investigations into convictions. It was the kind of evidence that made a tyrant fall harder than their victims ever dreamed possible. But we didn't stop there. Because if Karen had built this HOA mafia, someone else had helped her maintain it. Someone sent that message. Someone was warning me that the rot was deeper. So I expanded the team. Hugh came with years of resident logs. Claire brought digital forensics skills that belonged at federal agencies. The retired contractor brought financial expertise from decades of running large-scale projects. When we spread everything across the table, it looked less like neighborhood documents and more like an investigation board from a crime drama. But this wasn't fiction. This was Pinewood Estates. This was real. This was years of hidden abuse finally dragged into the light. We divided responsibilities with military precision. Claire would trace the IP addresses linked to Karen's fake accounts and digital threats. Hugh would cross-reference every suspicious financial transaction with resident testimonies. The contractor would calculate actual versus reported expenses on every HOA project from the last 5 years. Andrea would handle legal framing, ensuring every piece of evidence was admissible and interconnected. And I would be the spear, the one who took all those threads and drove them straight into the heart of the legal system Karen believed she had mastered. Each hour revealed something worse than the last. Bribes disguised as home improvement consultations, payments to companies that didn't exist, HOA funds routed through 3 different accounts before landing in Karen's possession. And the cherry on top, records showing Karen had manipulated fines specifically targeting residents she personally disliked. It wasn't just fraud. It wasn't just abuse of authority. It was a weaponized HOA cult, fueled by greed and vengeance. But the biggest break came when Claire looked up from her laptop, eyes wide behind her glasses. "Found it," she whispered. "Found the source of the message." She turned the screen toward me. The sender wasn't anonymous. It wasn't some rogue neighbor or random troll. It was a firm. A private firm that Karen's husband ran through 2 proxy owners. A firm that specialized in legal contingency enforcement, which was nothing more than a fancy phrase for intimidation and evidence tampering. The firm had a history, a pattern, a trail of complaints across multiple neighborhoods, every single one with a tyrannical HOA president who suddenly gained power they never should have had. Karen wasn't just a dictator. She was a client. And there were others like her. Dozens, maybe more. A network of petty overlords hiding behind paperwork and legal theatrics, all believing they were protected because nobody ever fought back hard enough to expose them. Until us. Andrea called the state attorney general at dawn. She didn't ask for an investigation. She triggered one, a real one, a formal one. The kind that sends investigators with badges, not emails. They wanted everything, every log, every recording, every signature, every invoice, every whisper of wrongdoing. And we gave it to them. 2 days later, unmarked cars flooded Pinewood Estates. Investigators fanned out across the neighborhood, knocking on doors, collecting statements, gathering evidence. Residents who had once whispered their fears now spoke boldly. Stories of intimidation attempts, trespassing violations, threats of property seizure, and random compliance inspections that felt more like home invasions. And Karen wasn't even there to defend herself. She was sitting in a detention cell miles away, unaware that her entire empire had started crumbling long before her trial began. But the investigators found something none of us expected. Emails, hundreds of them, between Karen and a county office employee who had fast-tracked her fraudulent filings. Approval forms pushed through without oversight. Signatures added after the fact. Legal notices never sent to residents. This wasn't just an HOA cult. This was a system, a machine, a coordinated chain of corruption that made Karen look less like a rogue tyrant and more like a cog in something bigger. But even cogs can break machines, and she had. Her mistake wasn't just attacking my child. It was assuming nobody would ever be strong enough to retaliate with precision. By the end of the week, Andrea stood in my living room with a court order in her hand. "This," she said, tapping the paper, "is the retaliation they didn't see coming. A full injunction freezing all HOA assets, a subpoena for Karen's husband's firm, a motion to dissolve the current board, and a demand for a forensic audit of every financial record tied to Pinewood Estates. It was over. Completely. Legally. Permanently. The HOA mafia Karen had built was being dismantled piece by rotten piece. And the best part? I wasn't done yet. Because retaliation wasn't just about exposure, it was about consequences. And the court order allowed us to do something Pinewood Estates had never seen before. A full resident vote to restructure the HOA with new leadership, new power, and new laws. And every new law was designed to prevent another dictator from rising again. But the ultimate retaliation? Watching the neighborhood Karen once terrorized begin to rebuild itself without fearing that clipboard parasite ever again. The final blow would land soon. But for now, the machine she built was dead, and not one of them could look her in the eye. The morning of the final hearing felt nothing like the chaos that had defined the last few weeks. No tension, no shouting, no fear slithering through the neighborhood like it once did under Karen's rule. Pinewood Estates felt lighter, quieter, almost reborn. Lawns swayed without surveillance. Doors opened without hesitation. People walked their dogs without scanning for clipboard parasites crouched in hedges waiting to issue behavioral disturbances. The entire community exhaled for the first time in years. And yet, beneath the calm, there was steel, a silent, unified resolve. Today wasn't just a hearing, it was an execution. The final severing of the last thread tying this place to the woman who thought she owned it. The courthouse steps were crowded with neighbors when I arrived. Some nodded in gratitude. Some whispered support. Some simply stared at the building, emotional after years of being bruised into silence. Inside, the air buzzed with the quiet hum of justice approaching. The prosecutor prepared exhibits with surgical efficiency. Andrea sat beside me, flipping through notes, though she barely needed them. We had built a case so ironclad it could suffocate doubt with its weight. And then, escorted by 2 officers, Karen appeared. Not the polished tyrant who once strutted around Pinewood Estates like a dictator, auditioning for a reality show. Not the coiffed queen of petty fines. Not the ice-hearted ruler of mailbox symmetry and lawn tyranny. This Karen was small, hair unbrushed, face washed out. Shoulders slumped like someone folded her in half and forgot to unfold her again. She scanned the courtroom with frantic, shrinking eyes. Nobody met them. Nobody offered sympathy. Nobody softened. The woman who built her power on intimidation found herself standing in a room immune to it. She tried to sit tall when the judge entered, but her spine refused to cooperate. The hearing began with formality, the calm before sentencing storms. The prosecutor walked through the entire case. Fraud, embezzlement, abuse of authority, trespassing violations disguised as inspections, intimidation attempts documented in her own emails, fabricated amendments, manufactured fines, stalking residents through subcontractors she paid under the table, creating fake digital accounts to publicly shame families. And the most damning piece, her documented assault on my daughter. The footage played without sound, and that silence was louder than any scream. Karen flinched every time the judge's eyes settled on her. She fidgeted, twitched, pulled at her sleeve. She looked like a person drowning in the very waters she once pushed others into. Her lawyer tried to pivot. Blame stress, blame miscommunication, blame me for provoking hostility within the community. Blame everyone except the woman who weaponized the HOA and turned it into a cult. But the courtroom wasn't buying it. The judge wasn't buying it. The residents weren't buying it. Karen's empire had already been disassembled piece by piece. Today was simply the day the last piece was crushed underfoot. When the prosecutor finished, the judge turned to me. "Would you like to speak?" I stood. My heartbeat was steady, controlled. Not the erratic thundering that filled my chest when I pulled my daughter from the water. Not the raw fury that consumed me when I watched Karen smirk that first day. Today I was calm, lethal, focused. "Your Honor," I said, voice even. Karen believed the HOA granted her power to decide who was allowed peace and who wasn't. She turned her authority into a weapon. And when she couldn't control people with fines, she escalated to intimidation. When intimidation failed, she escalated to violence. She pushed my daughter into the ocean, a child, for revenge, for ego, for control. Pinewood Estates has lived under her shadow long enough. Today we choose the light. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I didn't dramatize. I didn't need to. The truth was heavy enough on its own. Karen's lawyer asked if she wanted to make a statement. She did. Of course she did. She staggered to her feet, trying to conjure the self-righteous fire she once breathed so effortlessly. "I was protecting the community," she insisted. "I was maintaining standards. I was ensuring order. None of this is my fault." Her voice cracked, but she couldn't stop. "You're all ungrateful. You needed me. You needed structure. You needed someone strong enough to enforce what you couldn't handle." The courtroom watched, stone-faced, as she clawed through excuses, each one more deranged than the last. Not one person nodded. Not one person supported her. Not one person validated her delusions. The judge didn't interrupt her. He let her burn through the last scraps of her crumbling self-image. When she finally fell silent, trembling, he delivered the ruling with the kind of precise clarity that ends chapters permanently. He listed every charge, every violation, every crime. And then he lowered the gavel with a single sentence that shattered her entire world. "You are hereby sentenced to 30 years. Karen's knees buckled. Officers caught her before she hit the floor. Her breath hitched in jagged bursts. She tried to speak, but panic strangled the words. As she was pulled toward the exit, she turned her head searching for someone, anyone, to save her. But Pinewood Estates had already chosen who they stood with. And it wasn't her. She left the courtroom the same way she had lived her HOA reign, screaming, blaming, unraveling. Except this time nobody bowed. Nobody feared her. Nobody looked away. Outside, the sunlight felt different. Pure, clean, free. Neighbors gathered around me. Some shook my hand. Some hugged me. Some cried. It wasn't celebration, it was release. A collective unshackling from years of fear. Over the next weeks, the HOA underwent a transformation so profound, it felt like a rebirth. Hugh was elected president, restoring humanity to the community. Claire became treasurer, rebuilding transparency. New rules were written. Rules to protect residents, not punish them. For the first time in Pinewood history, people stepped outside without wondering if they were being watched. One quiet evening, I took my daughter back to the ocean. She stood on the deck of the boat, fearless, her small hand gripping mine before she leapt into the water with a laugh that echoed across the waves. She didn't just reclaim the ocean. She reclaimed her confidence, her voice, her joy, and watching her swim, I realized something. This wasn't just victory, it was restoration. Not just for my family, but for every family that survived Karen's reign. As the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky gold, I felt the final weight lift from my shoulders. Pinewood Estates was no longer a battlefield, no longer a prison, no longer her playground. And as for Karen? They backed off my property without a single word.